Daniel Reyes lived a quiet life in a small desert town, where nothing exciting ever seemed to happen. He spent most of his days in his modest workshop, fixing cars, broken appliances, and anything else that came into his hands. People in the town liked him because he could repair things that others had given up on, and he had a calm, gentle way about him. On most nights, he would sit outside his workshop, listening to the soft wind blowing across the sand and watching the stars fill the sky. He liked the peacefulness of the desert, the way it felt empty but full of quiet life, and he often thought about the strange beauty in silence. One night, as Daniel was locking up his workshop, he noticed a faint glow coming from the far end of the dirt road that ran along the edge of the town. At first, he thought it was just a reflection of the moon on something metallic. But then the glow flickered in a way that seemed unusual. Curiosity got the better of him, so he grabbed a flashlight and walked toward it. The desert at night was quiet, almost too quiet, and the wind had died down, making every small sound echo strangely. Daniel's steps crunched softly against the sand as he approached the source of the light. When he reached the spot, he noticed something strange. There, behind a large boulder, was a small figure crouched low to the ground. It was smaller than any child he had ever seen, with thin limbs and a tiny body that seemed almost fragile. Its skin was pale, but it had an unusual faint shimmer that made it look different from anything Daniel had ever encountered. The figure moved slightly, peeking out from behind the rock, as if it were frightened of being seen. Daniel slowed his steps and crouched down a little to appear less threatening. The small figure's eyes were wide and bright, filled with fear and confusion. Daniel realized that it must be lost or hurt, and he spoke softly, trying to sound calm and friendly. "Hey there, are you okay?" he asked, though he wasn't sure if it could understand him. The figure didn't move at first, but then it slowly extended its hand, holding something delicate and broken. Daniel took a closer look and realized it wasn't a toy he recognized. It looked like a small mechanical device, with parts that glowed faintly, and wires that seemed almost alive. Then the small voice spoke. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. "Human, can you fix my toy?" Mom dropped it when she fell. The words were whispered, trembling, but they were clear and full of urgency. Daniel felt a strange mix of surprise and concern. He had never imagined hearing a voice like that, especially from a being that looked so different from a human child. He wanted to ask questions, but he sensed that the figure needed help more than anything else. Daniel held out his hand slowly, showing that he meant no harm. The figure, after a moment of hesitation, handed over the broken device. Daniel examined it carefully. It was unlike anything he had ever worked on. The materials were unfamiliar, and the design was complex, but he could see the care and effort that had gone into making it. It was clear that this toy was very important to the small figure, probably more than just a plaything. He could see the worry in its eyes, the silent plea for help that was almost painful to watch. Daniel gently spoke to it again, this time with more confidence. "Don't worry, I'll try to fix it for you." The figure hesitated for a moment, then nodded slightly. Daniel noticed the way it shifted closer to him, still small and fragile, but trusting him just enough to allow him to help. At that moment, he realized that this was no ordinary situation. He had stumbled into something extraordinary, something that would change his quiet life forever. As he took the device and started examining its intricate details, the desert around him seemed to fade into the background. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the sand and carrying with it the faint sound of distant creatures. Though nothing was visible, the night sky above stretched endlessly, filled with stars that twinkled like tiny, distant lanterns. Daniel felt a mix of awe and fear. The world seemed larger and more mysterious than he had ever imagined. He had always been content with his ordinary life, but now he could feel the pull of something completely unknown. The small figure watched him closely, occasionally glancing behind at the dark desert, as if worried about something or someone coming. Daniel noticed that it seemed very protective of the device, holding it gently but firmly. He realized that it must have been through something frightening, and he felt a sudden urge to make sure it was safe. Even though he didn't understand everything about it, he understood enough. This being needed help, and he was the only one who could provide it, at that moment. For a few minutes, Daniel just sat there on the sand, studying the device and the figure. He could feel a connection forming, silent but strong. A bond between someone human and someone completely different, yet somehow similar. The fear in the figure's eyes slowly started to fade as it realized that Daniel wasn't going to hurt it. There was still worry, yes, but there was also hope. Daniel, too, felt a strange hope, a feeling that maybe he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The night stretched on, and Daniel carefully packed the small figure and the broken device to bring them to his workshop. He moved slowly, making sure the figure didn't feel rushed or threatened. The desert was quiet around them, the soft glow of the moon guiding their path. Daniel felt a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. He didn't know what he would face once he got to the workshop, but he knew that he couldn't leave the figure alone in the desert. Something about its vulnerability and trust called to him, as they walked. The small figure whispered its thanks, barely audible, and Daniel responded gently, promising that everything would be okay. Even though he had no idea how he would fix the device, he knew he would do his best. For Daniel, this night would mark the beginning of a story he never expected, a night when a tiny being from somewhere unknown entered his quiet, ordinary life and asked a simple question: could a human fix her toy? Daniel carefully carried the small figure into his workshop, a place filled with the smell of oil, metal, and old wood. The room was cluttered with half-finished projects, tools scattered across benches, and shelves crammed with boxes containing everything from old radios to car parts. The small figure looked around with wide, curious eyes, moving slowly as if afraid to touch anything. Daniel set it down gently on a chair and offered a reassuring smile. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe here." The small figure clutched the broken device tightly and looked up at him with a mix of fear and hope. Its eyes were large and reflective, catching the light of the single lamp Daniel had turned on. Daniel studied the device, turning it in his hands. It was delicate, with tiny moving parts and faint glowing lines that pulsed gently. He had seen complex machinery before, but this was unlike anything he had ever encountered. It was intricate in a way that made him both excited and nervous. The figure, who introduced herself as Leary, whispered in a voice barely louder than the hum of the workshop, "Mom, she got hurt when our ship fell. The toy, it's important." Daniel knelt down to her level, trying to show he understood. "I'll help you," he said. "I'll do everything I can to fix it." Leary's small shoulders relaxed a little, but her eyes still carried worry. Daniel realized that fixing the device was not just about repairing a broken object. It was about helping her feel safe and protecting her mother. He spread out his tools, selecting tiny screwdrivers, tweezers, and magnifying glasses. Leary watched every movement carefully, her small fingers hovering over the edge of the bench, as if she wanted to help but didn't know how. Daniel tried to work carefully, studying each part of the device and testing small components. The materials were unfamiliar, the design unlike anything human engineers had made. Some wires glowed faintly, others shifted when touched. Daniel realized that this toy was more than a plaything. It was part of her world, part of her life, maybe even part of her family's survival. As he worked, Leary explained in short, hesitant sentences what had happened. Her mother had been injured when their small spacecraft crashed while trying to hide from something they called observers. She described how the craft had fallen from the sky, hitting the ground roughly, and how she had watched her mother stumble and fall. Daniel listened intently, nodding and encouraging her to continue. Even though he did not understand all the details of her world or her language, he could feel the fear and love in her words. Daniel carefully connected tiny wires and aligned delicate components. He realized that he had to be extremely precise. One wrong move could break the device further. Leary's small hands sometimes trembled as she reached out to point at something she thought was important. Daniel paused, letting her guide him gently. "Here," she whispered. "That part. It's very fragile." He adjusted the piece carefully, and she nodded, a small smile forming on her lips for the first time since he had met her. While Daniel focused on the device, he noticed that Leary kept glancing at the workshop door, as if expecting someone or something to appear. He asked her about it, and she whispered that others might be looking for them, creatures or humans who might not understand their situation. Daniel felt a twinge of concern, but tried to keep calm. He wanted to make sure Leary felt safe. "Don't worry," he said. "I won't let anyone hurt you." She looked at him, her trust growing slowly as he continued to work. The hours passed slowly. Daniel cleaned, adjusted, and tested each part of the device. Leary stayed close, sometimes speaking softly about her mother, sometimes just sitting silently and watching. Daniel found himself thinking about the courage this tiny being had shown, and he felt a strange admiration for her bravery. It wasn't easy to trust someone so quickly, especially after everything she had been through. Yet here she was, sitting quietly in a human workshop, hoping that a stranger could help save something very precious. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Daniel managed to repair the most critical part of the device. The small lines of light pulsed steadily now, brighter and more consistent. Leary's eyes widened in relief and joy. She whispered a small thank you, barely audible, and Daniel smiled. But before he could relax, she pointed toward the desert and said softly, "Mom, she needs help. The ship, it's still there." Daniel realized that the toy was part of a larger system, and without it, her mother might still be in danger. Without hesitation, Daniel packed the device carefully and prepared to follow Leary to the crash site. She guided him through the desert, moving quickly but carefully, making sure he stayed behind her. The journey was quiet, except for the soft crunch of sand beneath their feet and Leary's whispered directions. Daniel couldn't help but feel a growing sense of responsibility. This wasn't just about fixing a broken machine. It was about helping someone in desperate need. Someone who had no one else to turn to. When they reached the site, Daniel saw the small wreckage of the spacecraft. It was partially buried in the sand, and a faint glow came from inside. Leary's mother was there, weak and injured, barely conscious. Daniel's heart went out to the tiny family. He gently helped Leary approach her mother, placing the repaired device close to her. Almost immediately, the device activated some hidden mechanism in the craft. Lights turned on, and a soft hum filled the air, stabilizing the environment. Leary's mother stirred, blinking in surprise and relief. Daniel watched as the mother slowly regained strength, her eyes meeting his with gratitude. Leary smiled, a mixture of relief and joy spreading across her small face. Daniel realized that this was more than he had expected when he first saw the small figure hiding behind a boulder. This was a rescue, a moment of trust between species, and a chance to help someone in a way he never could have imagined. As they stayed near the wreckage, Daniel noticed the vastness of the desert around them, the quiet beauty of the night, and the way the stars seemed to shine brighter here, as if acknowledging the small act of kindness unfolding below. He felt a strange sense of wonder, knowing that the night would stay with him forever. The small alien girl, who had whispered a simple request, had brought him into a story far larger than anything he had known, a story of courage, trust, and the unexpected connections that could change a life in a single night. Daniel knew that fixing the small device was only the first step. Leary's mother still lay weak inside the damaged spacecraft, and the desert around them was wide and empty, but not safe. Daniel carefully examined the craft, trying to understand how it worked. It was strange and unlike any machine he had seen. The outer shell was dented and scratched, with small panels hanging loose. Soft lights glowed faintly along the edges, pulsing gently, and there was a faint humming sound coming from the interior. He realized that the small device he had repaired was somehow connected to the ship's life support system, and it might stabilize her mother's condition if placed properly. Leary guided Daniel through the craft, explaining in short, broken sentences what each part did. Daniel listened carefully, nodding as he tried to follow her instructions. Some of the panels had buttons or levers, but they didn't look like anything human-made. The glow from the device he repaired now spread faintly throughout the ship. As Daniel carefully positioned it in a slot near the control panel, he noticed the lights in the ship flicker and stabilize. Leary's mother stirred slightly, her breathing becoming steadier. Daniel felt a rush of relief. The device was doing its job, but the desert night was far from calm. Strange shadows moved in the distance, and faint mechanical sounds reached Daniel's ears. Leary whispered, "They are coming. Observers." Daniel paused, realizing that Leary's earlier fears were real. There were others who had detected the crash. He didn't know if they were dangerous, but he could see the worry in Leary's eyes, and he knew he had to act quickly. He promised her softly, "Don't worry. I'll protect both of you." Leary nodded, her trust in him clear, despite her fear. Daniel focused on stabilizing the spacecraft further. He adjusted small levers and connected wires carefully, guided by Leary's instructions. The ship seemed to respond to their actions, the faint hum becoming stronger and more consistent. He noticed that certain panels lit up when the device was near them, almost as if the toy he fixed was communicating with the craft itself. Daniel realized that the device was not just a simple machine, it was part of a larger system, something that maintained life and balance inside the ship. Leary's tiny face was filled with awe and hope as she watched him work. Time passed slowly, and Daniel could feel the tension growing. Every small movement had to be precise. One mistake could cause the device to fail and endanger Leary's mother. He concentrated fully, his hands steady despite the urgency. Leary stayed close, occasionally pointing at a lever or pressing a small button, her small voice whispering encouragement. Daniel felt a bond growing between them, a silent understanding that they were working together to save someone's life. Finally, after several tense minutes, Daniel managed to align all the parts correctly. The lights on the control panel glowed steadily, and a gentle hum filled the spacecraft, stronger, and more soothing than before. Lyri's mother's breathing deepened, and color slowly returned to her face. Lyri's small hand clutched Daniel's arm, a silent thank you, and he smiled at her softly, feeling a mixture of relief and awe. The device he had fixed had done exactly what it was meant to do. It had given her mother a chance to recover, but just as Daniel was beginning to feel some relief, the soft noises in the desert grew louder. Small vehicles approached, their headlights cutting across the sand. Daniel realized that the observers Lyri had mentioned were arriving. He quickly assessed the situation. The spacecraft and its occupants were vulnerable, and he needed to protect them while keeping the visitors at a distance. He positioned himself near the entrance, keeping Lyri and her mother behind him. His mind raced as he thought of ways to explain the situation if the newcomers approached. When the vehicles reached the edge of the craft, they stopped. Daniel stepped forward cautiously, showing his hands clearly. He wanted to make sure they knew he wasn't a threat. Lyri's mother began to regain some strength, her eyes weakly observing the newcomers. Daniel realized that their survival depended not just on the device and the ship, but also on his ability to act calmly and carefully under pressure. The observers did not move immediately. They seemed curious, cautious, and perhaps unsure what to do. Daniel spoke softly, explaining that the aliens were injured and needed help. The voice of authority among the newcomers questioned him, but his calm, honest approach seemed to convince them. Slowly, they stepped back, allowing Daniel, Lyri, and her mother to remain in the desert. The tension in the air eased slightly, though Daniel remained vigilant. He realized how fragile trust could be, especially when different species and worlds intersected in a moment of crisis. With the immediate threat gone, Daniel focused again on helping Lyri's mother. He checked her condition carefully, ensuring that she could sit up and that the life support system was functioning steadily. The repaired device continued to pulse gently, and the spacecraft's interior lights glowed warmly. Lyri's mother whispered a faint thank you, her voice weak but full of relief. Lyri hugged her mother's arm, tears of joy and fear mingling in her eyes. Daniel felt a sense of accomplishment, knowing that they had all survived this critical moment together. As the night stretched on, Daniel, Lyri, and her mother remained near the spacecraft. The quiet hum of the device, and the soft glow of the lights filling the desert. Daniel realized that this experience was unlike anything he had ever faced. He had not only repaired a complex alien device, but he had also helped save a life and navigated a tense encounter with unknown observers. He looked at Lyri and her mother, feeling a deep connection with them, a silent promise that he would help them get through the rest of the night safely. Daniel also noticed something remarkable. The tiny device he had fixed seemed to have a personality of its own, responding to Lyri's guidance and adjusting to the spacecraft's systems. It was more than a machine, it was a link between worlds, a bridge of trust and survival. Watching it work, Daniel felt awe and humility. He realized that even in the most ordinary human life, extraordinary events could occur, and small acts of skill and kindness could have immense consequences. By the time dawn approached, the desert began to glow softly with the first light. The spacecraft was stable, Lyri's mother rested safely, and the observers had retreated for now. Daniel took a moment to breathe, exhausted but grateful. He looked at Lyri, who smiled faintly, and knew that their journey was far from over, but that they had overcome a critical moment together. He understood that his role was not only as a mechanic, but as a protector and ally. The small alien girl and her mother had entered his life, and he had already become an essential part of theirs. Daniel stayed close to the small spacecraft, carefully watching over Lyri and her mother. The repaired device continued to glow softly, stabilizing the ship and keeping Lyri's mother breathing steadily. Daniel realized that the danger had not completely passed. The desert was quiet, but the night was unpredictable, and the observers could return at any moment. He checked the spacecraft's hull and interior systems, making small adjustments, moving panels gently, and listening for any strange noises. Lyri sat nearby, holding her mother's hand and occasionally glancing at Daniel with a mix of trust and hope. Lyri's mother slowly opened her eyes, blinking in the dim light. She looked at Daniel with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. Her voice was weak, but she whispered something to Lyri, who translated softly, explaining that her mother's body felt better now because of the device he had repaired. Daniel knelt down beside them and spoke gently. "You're going to be okay. The device is keeping everything stable." Lyri's mother smiled faintly, and Daniel noticed the deep relief in both of their faces. The sense of accomplishment was quiet but powerful. He had helped save a life. As Daniel focused on the spacecraft's systems, he realized how extraordinary the device truly was. It was more than a toy. It was a critical part of the ship, likely a key to its functions and the family's survival. Every movement of his hands required precision, as the ship's fragile systems were unfamiliar to him. Leary quietly pointed out certain panels or switches that he might need to adjust, guiding him in the soft, cautious language of her small voice. Daniel followed her instructions carefully, making minor corrections that helped stabilize the ship even further. The small family's trust in him grew with every passing minute. Leary's mother slowly began to regain strength, her breathing more consistent, her movements steadier. Daniel watched carefully, making sure she could sit upright and move without strain. He gently encouraged her to drink some water he had brought, and she did so slowly, a faint smile crossing her lips. Leary squeezed her mother's hand tightly, whispering softly in her language, and Daniel felt the weight of their bond. He was not only helping fix the ship, but also helping to restore a sense of hope and safety for them. Suddenly, a low sound in the distance caught Daniel's attention. He tensed, scanning the desert horizon. The soft hum of the ship and the night's natural silence were broken by the approach of vehicles moving across the sand. Leary's eyes widened in fear, and she whispered that the observers were coming back. Daniel's heart raced, but he forced himself to stay calm. He looked at Leary and her mother and said, "Stay here. I'll make sure they don't hurt you." He positioned himself in front of the spacecraft, his body tense and ready. When the observers arrived, their vehicles stopped a short distance from the spacecraft. Daniel stepped forward slowly, showing his hands clearly to signal that he was not a threat. He spoke in a calm voice, explaining that the aliens were injured and needed care. One of the observers, clearly in charge, studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. They didn't approach any closer, but their presence was unmistakable. Daniel realized that honesty and calmness had protected the family, and he felt a quiet sense of relief that trust, even in tense situations, could make a difference. Daniel returned to helping Leary's mother, checking the ship's systems to make sure everything continued to function smoothly. The repaired device glowed steadily, responding to his adjustments, and the spacecraft's internal lights were warm and soothing. Leary leaned close to her mother, brushing her hair back gently, whispering words of comfort. Daniel noticed how important the small gestures were, how they helped the family feel safe and calm. The night's tension slowly eased, replaced by cautious relief as dawn approached. The desert began to light softly, with the first pale rays of sunlight. Daniel took a moment to breathe, feeling exhausted but relieved. Leary's mother was stable, her eyes more alert, her body recovering. Leary smiled faintly, her trust in Daniel evident. He knew that while the immediate danger had passed, the family still needed to leave the desert safely. The device was crucial for their departure, but he realized that it would take care, planning, and courage to help them get away without interference. Daniel carefully explained to Leary that the device was not just a toy, that it was an important part of the ship, and that using it properly could help them leave safely. Leary nodded, understanding that he was helping not only her mother but also the entire family. Daniel adjusted small components, aligned panels, and made sure that the device was fully integrated with the ship's systems. Every small action he took seemed to make the spacecraft respond more positively, as if it recognized the care being given. By the time the sun rose fully over the desert, the spacecraft was stable. Leary's mother was awake and moving cautiously, and the repaired device continued to function perfectly. Daniel looked at the small family, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. He had helped repair not just a machine, but a fragile hope, and he realized the immense value of trust, courage, and human kindness. He knew that soon they would have to leave the desert, but for now, they were safe. The quiet morning light fell across the sand, painting the scene with warmth, and Daniel felt a strange mixture of exhaustion, relief, and awe at the extraordinary night they had survived together. He watched Leary and her mother as they prepared to move, knowing that the next steps would be just as critical. The device he had repaired was ready to help, and the spacecraft responded to their movements with a gentle hum. Daniel felt a profound sense of connection to these small beings, realizing that the night had changed him as much as it had saved them. He knew that in a world full of ordinary moments, extraordinary experiences could happen unexpectedly, and small acts of skill, courage, and kindness could create life-changing outcomes. Daniel watched carefully as Leary helped her mother sit up in the small spacecraft. The soft glow from the repaired device filled the interior, casting warm light over their faces. Leary's mother was breathing steadily now, her eyes brighter, and she seemed to regain a little strength with each passing moment. Daniel could feel the relief in Leary's small hands as they gently held her mother's. The tension that had filled the desert the night before was slowly lifting. replaced by quiet anticipation. He knew that soon they would have to leave, and that moment weighed on him more than he expected. The spacecraft seemed alive, humming gently in response to the repaired device. Daniel observed as lights shifted along the panels, responding to the smallest adjustments he made. He realized that the device wasn't just a tool, it was a part of their world, their survival, and it required care and understanding. Leary pointed to different panels, whispering instructions in her soft, cautious language. Daniel followed them carefully, adjusting wires and pressing small levers. Each small correction seemed to make the ship respond more positively, and Leary's mother's strength gradually returned as the life support systems continued to stabilize. Daniel's mind raced as he considered the next steps. They needed to leave the desert without drawing attention, and he had no experience with spacecraft, alien or otherwise, but he understood that the repaired device was key to the process. Leary's trust in him, as well as her mother's quiet hope, gave him courage. He reassured them both softly, explaining that he would help them get ready and that everything would be okay. Leary's small hand brushed against his arm, a gesture of trust and gratitude, and Daniel felt a deep sense of responsibility and care for them. As the spacecraft powered up further, it began to respond to their combined efforts. Panels that had been flickering now glowed steadily, and the gentle hum grew more consistent. Leary's mother tested her movements, slowly rising and standing with Leary's support. Daniel offered his steadying hand, guiding them to make sure no sudden movement would disturb the ship's systems. The desert around them was quiet, the morning sunlight casting long shadows across the sand. The peace outside was a sharp contrast to the tense night they had survived, but Daniel knew that it could change at any moment. Suddenly, movement at the edge of the desert caught Daniel's eye. The observers who had arrived before were approaching again, their vehicles glinting in the sunlight. Daniel's heart raced, but he remained calm. He moved in front of Leary and her mother, signaling for them to stay back. He explained gently to the approaching figures that they were injured visitors who needed care and were not a threat. The observers paused, studying Daniel carefully, then slowly withdrew, apparently convinced by his calm, honest approach. Daniel exhaled slowly, relieved that his actions had protected the small family once again. Once the immediate threat had passed, Daniel focused on making sure the spacecraft was ready for departure. He double-checked the life support systems, ensured the repaired device was functioning perfectly, and followed Leary's guidance to calibrate small panels. The ship responded smoothly, humming in a steady rhythm. Leary's mother moved more confidently now, helping Daniel with minor adjustments. Each small success reinforced their trust in him, and in the repaired device, Daniel felt a quiet satisfaction that came not from recognition, but from knowing that he had made a real difference in someone's life. With everything prepared, it was time for the quiet farewell. Leary hugged Daniel tightly, pressing her small face against his chest, and whispered a simple, heartfelt thank you. Daniel smiled softly, feeling a warmth he had never experienced before. Leary's mother placed a small glowing bead in his hand, a gift of gratitude from her culture. Daniel marveled at the soft light that seemed to pulse gently, a tangible reminder of the extraordinary night he had shared with them. He carefully tucked the bead into his pocket, knowing it would remain with him always. The spacecraft's engines began a low, steady hum, signaling that it was ready for takeoff. Daniel stepped back, watching as Leary and her mother settled inside, adjusting panels and preparing for departure. Leary looked back at him one last time, her eyes full of gratitude and hope. Daniel nodded, understanding that this small gesture was their way of saying goodbye. He watched as the spacecraft rose slowly into the sky, glowing softly against the morning light, and then ascended higher until it disappeared completely from sight. The desert seemed quieter now, almost empty, but Daniel knew that this extraordinary experience had left an indelible mark on his life. Daniel remained standing there for several minutes, feeling a strange mixture of relief, wonder, and nostalgia. He realized that he had been part of something truly extraordinary, a night in which a small alien girl and her mother had trusted a human to save them, and he had succeeded. The glowing bead in his pocket was the only proof of the incredible encounter, a reminder of the fragile, precious connections that can form between completely different worlds. Daniel returned slowly to his workshop, reflecting on the events of the night, the courage of the small family, and the trust they had placed in him. He carefully placed the bead on a shelf in his workshop, near his tools, where he could see it every day. It was small, glowing softly, but it carried the weight of an entire experience, a reminder that even ordinary humans could make a difference in the lives of others, even in worlds far beyond their own. Daniel felt a deep sense of humility and gratitude, understanding that extraordinary events often come quietly, unexpectedly. and without warning. The small alien girl's whispered question, "Can you fix my toy?" had led to a night of courage, trust, and remarkable human kindness. The desert returned to its usual quietness, the wind blowing softly across the sand, carrying no trace of the extraordinary events that had just unfolded. Daniel worked on his projects as usual, yet everything had changed. He looked at the small glowing bead and smiled softly. Knowing that some experiences are so profound that they remain in the heart forever, he understood that life had a way of surprising those who were willing to act with skill, care, and kindness, and that even a single night could hold adventures beyond imagination. The memory of Leary, her mother, and the repaired device would stay with him. A reminder that trust, bravery, and compassion can bridge even the widest gaps between worlds.